On the night of a harvest moon, if you drive up into the mountains looking for a town called Ashford Hollow, you will not find it. Not because it isn't there. It's there. It has been there longer than the maps admit. You won't find it because the road will be closed, not with a gate, not with a sign, but with people. Men and women standing shoulder to shoulder across the county blacktop, lanterns in their hands, coats buttoned to the throat, waiting for you to slow down and turn around. They won't shout at you. They won't reach for anything. They will only walk up to your window, and in the flattest, most patient voice you have ever heard, they will ask you to be back down the mountain before the moon clears the ridgeline. And if you make the mistake of asking why, they will tell you the same thing every stranger has been told on that road for 170 years. Nobody leaves the hollow on the night of a harvest moon, and nobody comes in. Most of them turn around. I have to pause here for a second, because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. Of course they do. It's late, the road is bad, and there is something about a wall of quiet people in lantern light that shortcuts every argument in your head. But every so often, somebody doesn't turn around. Somebody laughs, rolls the window back up, and drives through. And this is a documentary about what the people of Ashford Hollow believe happens next. It is also a documentary about why, when you start pulling on that thread, you don't find a ghost story at all. You find a ledger. You find a contract. You find an entire economy that was supposed to be dead 200 years ago, still quietly collecting what it thinks it's owed. I want to be honest with you before we go up that mountain. When I started this, I thought I was making a video about a superstition. A quaint mountain custom, the kind of thing you file next to, not walking under ladders. I was going to be gentle about it, maybe a little affectionate, and I was going to come home. That is not what happened. What happened is that I found the books, and once you have seen the books, you cannot unsee them, and the affectionate little video you were going to make dies in your throat. So let me take you through it the way it came to me, in order, piece by piece, because the order is the only thing that kept me sane. Let me tell you about the last man we can confirm drove through that line. His name was Cyrus Bell. He sold farm insurance out of a two-tone Oldsmobile, and in the autumn of 1974, he had an appointment in the next county that he was determined to keep. Bell was not a superstitious man. He kept a route book. He kept his receipts, and the receipts are how we know he was in Ashford Hollow at all, because he wrote one out to the boarding house where he took his lunch that afternoon. The woman who ran the boarding house, a widow named Effie Trawler, told the state police later that she warned him twice. She told him the moon was full that night, and it was a harvest moon, and that he was welcome to a bed for free, no charge, if he would only stay until morning. Bell thanked her, said he had a wife in Pikeville, and left $1 tip on a 90-cent plate. He drove out toward the county road a little after 6. The people were already gathering. Effie said you could set your watch by it, the way they came down out of their houses on those nights, not hurried, not talking much, and formed up across the blacktop where the town limit used to be marked by an iron post. Bell would have seen them. He would have slowed down. And then, because he was a reasonable man in a hurry, he would have decided that a crowd of farmers was not going to stand in front of a moving car, and he would have been right about that part. They stepped aside. They always step aside. That is the thing people get wrong about Ashford Hollow. The town has never, not once, physically stopped anyone from leaving. They only ask, and they step aside, and they watch you go. Cyrus Bell's Oldsmobile was found 4 days later, parked neatly on the shoulder of a road 11 miles away, keys in the ignition, route book on the passenger seat, half a cup of cold coffee in the holder. No sign of a struggle, no sign of Bell. And here is the detail that the state police wrote down and then, you can tell, wished they hadn't, because they underlined it twice and never mentioned it again. The route book on the seat was open to that day's page, and Bell had made his usual neat entries all through the afternoon, right up to the boarding house lunch. But there was one more line, written after that, in a hand that started as Bell's careful salesman's script and came apart halfway through the word, like the pen had been moving faster than the man. It said, "They were right, Turnar. That's where it stops. Turnar." He never finished it. His wife in Pikeville had never heard of Ashford Hollow, and when the police brought her up the mountain to see if anything jogged loose, she stood in the middle of that little town, turned a slow circle, and started to cry without being able to say why. She said the buildings were wrong. That was the word she used, wrong. She couldn't explain it any better than that. And honestly, neither could the police, and neither could I, the first time I stood there. So let's talk about the buildings, because the buildings are where this story stops being a folk tale and starts being something much harder to put down. Ashford Hollow sits in a fold of the mountains along the line where West Virginia and Kentucky lean into each other, in a county so small that for most of the 20th century it shared a single circuit judge with two others. The official story is simple and boring, which is usually how you know an official story is doing a job. The town was founded in 1847 by a company of settlers led by a man named Josiah Merrick, who came over the gap looking for salt and timber and stayed when he found both. There is a historical marker that says exactly this. It was put up in 1961 by a heritage society, and it is, as far as we can tell, completely false in every detail that matters. Because here is the problem. When Josiah Merrick supposedly arrived in that empty hollow in 1847 with a company of axes and mules, the town was already there. I want to be careful here, because this is the point where a lot of people check out, and I understand why. But stay with me, because the evidence is not a rumour. It is sitting in the county courthouse, which is itself part of the evidence. Ashford Hollow, a town that at its absolute peak had maybe 800 people, has a courthouse that would embarrass a city of 50,000. It is 3 stories of dressed stone, with a dome, with fluted columns quarried from something that is not local rock, with iron railings cast in a pattern so fine that the last blacksmith who could have made them died before the town was allegedly founded. The building has no construction records, none. There is no contract, no payment ledger, no cornerstone with a date, no newspaper account of it going up. In a country that documented the price of every nail driven into every frontier church, the grandest building for 60 miles in any direction simply appears in the record already finished, already in use, the first time anyone writes anything down about the town at all. And it is not the only one. Walk the main street with your eyes open and you start to feel what the widow from Pikeville felt. There is a bank building with a vault door cast in the same impossible ironwork as the courthouse railings, and the bank was never, in any record, a bank. There is a structure the locals call the meeting hall that has the acoustics and the tiered floor of an opera house, in a town that never had 800 people to fill it. There is a dry stone fountain in the square, fed by no pipe anyone has ever found, and old photographs from the 1890s show it running with water, clean and high, in a drought year that dried up every well in the county. And under the paved road, when the state came through in the 1950s to widen it and cut down into the hillside, they found another road, older, straighter, wider than the one on top, built of fitted stone with no mortar and no seams, running dead level into the mountain in a direction the current road does not go and never went. The state filled it back in. There was no line item in the budget for a road that shouldn't exist, so officially it doesn't. The masonry is the part that gets under your skin if you stand close to it. The oldest walls in Ashford Hollow are not stacked. They are fitted, the way a puzzle is fitted, stones the size of a car, pressed against stones, the size of a coffin with joints so tight you cannot slide a knife blade between them. And no 2 stones the same shape, and every angle carried perfectly around a curve. Nobody in 1847 could do that. Nobody in 1947 could do that. There are maybe a handful of places on Earth where that kind of stonework survives, and the official history assigns all of them to peoples who supposedly had no iron tools and no written mathematics, and then it changes the subject, quickly, the way you change the subject at a dinner table when a guest says something true and rude. Then there is the star fort on the ridge above the town. Now, if you follow the kind of history that runs underneath the history they teach in school, you already sat up a little when I said that, because you know that star forts are the thing. They are the fingerprint, all across the world, in places that supposedly had no engineers, no surveyors, no reason and no ability to build them. You find these enormous geometric earthworks, perfect 8-pointed stars, aligned to the compass, aligned to the stars, built to a standard of mathematics that the people who supposedly lived there could not have written down, let alone dug into the ground. The official history calls them military fortifications and moves on quickly, but nobody ever seems to have fought at most of them, and the one above Ashford Hollow guards nothing. It sits on a ridge that overlooks no trade route, no river crossing, no pass. It just sits there, perfect, patient, older than the town, pointing at the sky. The locals do not call it a fort, they call it the reckoning ground, and they do not go up there, not on any night, and absolutely not on that one. There is exactly one story in living memory of somebody going up on a harvest moon, a teenage boy named Toby Sizemore, who did it on a dare in the summer of 1968, and Toby came back down the mountain, and Toby was fine, and Toby never spoke a full sentence again for the rest of his life. Not injured, not mad, the doctors said, just quiet, in the way a house is quiet after everyone has moved out. His mother said he would sometimes stand at the window on a full moon and count under his breath, very softly, on and on, numbers with no end to them, and if you asked him what he was counting, he would look at you with enormous patience and say the only thing he ever reliably said for the last 40 years of his life. He would say, "I'm not finished yet." So let me introduce you to the one outsider who ever got the people of Ashford Hollow to talk, and who wrote it down before he understood what he was writing. In 1936, at the bottom of the Great Depression, the federal government paid unemployed writers to fan out across the country and collect the stories of ordinary Americans. It was called the Federal Writers Project, and it was a real program, and it produced thousands of pages of interviews that are still sitting in archives right now. One of those writers was a man named Harlan Price, a failed newspaperman from Charleston who drew the assignment nobody wanted, which was the backcountry hollows where people didn't much like being written down. Price spent 3 weeks in Ashford Hollow in the fall of 1936. His notebook survives, and most of it reads like exactly what it was supposed to be, recipes and remedies and the price of a hog, but the last 11 pages don't. The last 11 pages are about the staying. That's their word for it. Not the curfew, not the lockdown, the staying. Price interviewed an old woman he calls only Granny Odell, who was, by her own count, 94 years old, which would put her birth around 1842, 5 years before the town was supposedly founded. Price noticed this. He wrote in the margin, "In his own hand, she claims to be older than the town and does not think this strange." And when he pushed her on it, she told him something that he transcribed word for word, and that I am going to read to you exactly as he wrote it down, because the phrasing matters. She said, "The town was here when we came, and the debt was here when we came, and we did not make the debt, but we answer it, because someone must, and better us inside the line than our children outside it." Price asked her what debt, and this is where his handwriting changes. You can see it in the scan. It gets faster, messier, like he's writing to keep up. Granny Odell told him that long before her people came over the gap, long before there was a Kentucky or a Virginia or a United States, there was an older country here. She didn't have a name for it. Her grandmother's grandmother had a name for it, she said, but the name had been taken away, the way you take a knife away from a child. What she knew was this. The old country built the courthouse and the star on the ridge and the fine ironwork and the deep straight roads that the new settlers just paved over. The old country ran on a different kind of money, and when the old country fell, it did not fall the way empires are supposed to fall, slowly, with historians watching. It fell all at once, in a single season, and the water and the mud came up over everything, and when it went back down, the buildings were still standing, but the people were gone. Almost all of them, and into those empty, beautiful, impossible buildings walked a company of ordinary settlers with axes and mules, who found a town already built and moved into it and thanked God for their luck. And they did not read the contract they were signing by moving in. Price filed his report with the Writers' Project office in Charleston in December of 1936. The last 11 pages were not in it. He kept them. We know he kept them because they turned up 60 years later in a box of his effects sold at an estate sale, which is the only reason we have them at all. and Harlan Price himself, the failed newspaperman who was going to write the Great American Book of Forgotten Places, never wrote another word for publication after Ashford Hollow. He took a job checking freight manifests at a rail yard, a job that is, when you think about it, just counting things and making sure the numbers match, and he did it quietly for 26 years, and the one time his niece asked him about the mountain assignment, he told her he had learned something up there he wished he could give back, and she said, "What?" And he said that some accounts are still open, and he never explained what he meant. Now, I know exactly how this sounds. I know that a lost advanced civilization erased by a mud flood is a phrase that makes a certain kind of person close the tab, and I am not going to sit here and tell you that Granny Odell was giving Harlan Price a peer-reviewed lecture in 1936. What I am going to tell you is that there is a way of looking at history, and specifically at economic history, where her story is not the strange part. The strange part is the story we usually tell instead. Because think about what we actually accept. We accept that a continent full of monumental earthworks, geometric mounds, aligned star forts, and stonework that later settlers could not reproduce, was built by people who then vanished so completely that we assign the work to unknown mound builders and change the subject. We accept that the maps of the world were once full of a place, an enormous northern empire, drawn on globe after globe by serious cartographers for centuries, and then quietly erased from the atlas and from the school book, until the name itself became a punchline you get laughed out of the room for saying with a straight face. And we accept a timeline of American settlement where somehow the grandest architecture, the most sophisticated public works, the widest and straightest roads are the oldest things in a given place, and everything built afterward is smaller, cruder, and cheaper. That is not how progress is supposed to work. Progress is supposed to build up. But over and over, in these hollows, you find a civilization that appears to have started at the top and fallen down the stairs. And here is the detail that the people who study this cannot stop circling, because it is the detail that turns an architecture mystery into a human one. After the fall, whatever the fall was, the record fills up with children, orphans. Enormous numbers of them, all at once, more orphans than the ordinary running of the world produces, moved and sorted and shipped across the country by the trainload in the decades, right after the impossible buildings supposedly went up, as if a whole generation had woken to find that every adult who could have told them who built the cities was simply gone. We put them on trains. We handed them out at station platforms like freight. And they grew up inside the grand buildings, never knowing the buildings were impossible, because who would they have compared notes with when everyone old enough to remember had been erased in the same season as the country they belonged to? That is what a reset is, if it happened. Not fire from the sky. A quiet, total substitution. The buildings stay. The debts stay. The names are taken away, like a knife from a child, and new children are set down inside the walls to keep paying a rent they will never once be told the origin of. And then, a couple of generations on, we held enormous fairs, world's fairs. Vast temporary cities of white palaces, domed and columned and blazing with a kind of electric light the age was not supposed to have yet, thrown up in a matter of months, they tell us, by builders who then tore every one of them back down. We are asked to believe that the peak architectural achievement of the century was a set of buildings deliberately demolished the week after the crowds went home. Or you can believe the other thing, that the fairs were not built but uncovered, that the white cities were salvage, that the crowds were being walked through the swept-out leftovers of the old country and handed a comfortable story about progress to explain why nobody could build them again. I am not going to tell you which to believe. I am telling you that Ashford Hollow, with its opera house for a town that never had an audience and its fountain fed by no pipe on earth, sits precisely where that theory says a surviving piece of the old country should sit. Still occupied, still paying, still counting its own heads on the one night a year the bill comes due. Revisionist economic history asks one uncomfortable question. What if the reason the old buildings are grander than the new ones is that they were not built by the people we credit? What if a settlement economy did not raise those structures at all, but inherited them, moved into a going concern, and spent the next 2 centuries slowly failing to maintain a machine it never understood and could not have built? And what if some of those going concerns came with obligations still running? Not metaphorical obligations. financial ones. A tab that never got closed because the party that opened it was gone, and the party that walked in and took over the lease became liable for the balance without ever reading the terms. And I want to sit in that idea for a second, because this is the part that turns the whole thing from a spooky story into something that scrapes against real history. Hard. We already know that America ran, for a long time, on economies where a person was not free to leave. We had company towns, where the company owned the store and the house, and paid you in scrip that was only good at the store, so that your wages went out one hand and came back the other, and you could work your whole life and end it owing the company money. We had debt peonage, where a debt could be inherited, where you were born owing what your father owed, and the law would chase you across a state line to bring you back to the ground you were bound to. This is not folklore. This is the documented economic history of the exact mountains we are talking about. Now take that machinery, the inherited debt, the currency you cannot spend anywhere else, the ground you are not free to leave, and ask yourself what it would look like if a version of it predated the coal company, predated the country, predated the settlers, and was denominated not in scrip, but in something the settlers could not see on the ledger because they did not have the eyes for the column it was written in. Think about what money actually is for a second, because we treat it like a thing, and it is not a thing. It is a record of who owes what to whom. That is all it has ever been. A dollar is an IOU that everyone has quietly agreed to honour, a little portable piece of debt, and an economy is nothing but the vast running ledger of those debts, updated constantly, mostly trusted, almost never questioned. So it is not actually strange, when you sit with it, that an older and stranger economy might have kept its ledger in a different denomination. What is strange is only which denomination. We denominate in labour and goods and hours. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. Ashford Hollow's older creditor, whatever it is, denominated in presence, in attendance. In the simple, terrible fact of a named soul standing on a particular patch of ground on a particular night and answering when it is called. And once you accept that a debt can be written in that currency, the whole apparatus of the place stops being supernatural and starts being, God help me, ordinary. It is a mortgage. It is a company town. It is debt peonage with the moon for a foreman. The real horror of Ashford Hollow is not that it runs on magic. The horror is that it runs on economics, on a currency we simply forgot we could still be charged in. That is what Ashford Hollow believes it is. Not a town, a tenant, bound to a company store older than the flag, paying in a currency there is no bank for, and every harvest moon rent comes due. Let me show you the ledger, because there is a ledger, and it is the single most disturbing document I have ever been allowed to photograph. It is kept in the courthouse, in the same room as the deed records, in a wooden box that the county clerk will show you if you ask right and don't laugh. They call it the tolling book. It is bound in something that is probably just old leather, and probably just looks like something else in bad light. The pages are ruled in columns, like any accounting ledger, and the ink in the oldest entries is a brown that has gone almost to nothing. The columns are what stops your breath. The first column is a date, and the dates run backward past 1,847, past 1,800, past every date the official history says anyone was here, in a hand that changes across generations but never breaks, as if the book was handed down and kept up without a single missed year. The second column is a number, and the third column, at the top of the first page, in the oldest ink, is a single word that every clerk since has copied faithfully at the head of every new page for 170 years. The word is present. That's the whole system. That is the terrible, simple thing at the bottom of Ashford Hollow. The debt is not paid in money. It was never money. Granny Odell told Price the old country ran on a different kind of currency, and here it is, ruled into columns. The old country was paid in presence, in souls accounted for, in a full and correct count of everyone who belongs to the ground, delivered on the appointed night, inside the line where they can be tallied. Every harvest moon, the town does its books. Every harvest moon, someone opens the tolling book to a fresh page, writes the date, writes the number of living souls that belong to Ashford Hollow, and writes the word present. And the count has to be right. The count has to match. Because the entries where the count did not match are still in the book, and next to those numbers, in the same patient hand, is a different word. The word is short. And I should tell you how the count is actually taken, because it is not what you would guess. It is not a head count. Nobody walks the town with a clicker. What the clerk does, on the night, standing in the courthouse door with the book open to the fresh page, is read the roll, every name that belongs to the ground, spoken out loud into the dark, and from the porches and the doorways, one by one, each living soul answers to their own name. Here, here, here. That is the currency, not bodies, names, answered. And here is the part that took me the longest to understand, and that I most wish I still didn't. The roll does not only contain the living. At the end, the clerk reads the names of everyone who has died since the last harvest moon, and to each of those names the town answers nothing, and lets the silence stand, and the clerk marks them gone, and only then is the count closed. They are not counting who is alive, they are reconciling the account, telling the ground, in the ground's own plain language, exactly who it took and exactly who it did not, so that there can be no confusion, no second reaching, no name called twice. The staying is not a vigil, it is an audit. And you very much do not want to be the unexplained entry when the audit is read. There are 11 short entries in the tolling book. 11. In 170 years of documented harvest moons, which tells you something on its own, because it tells you that for the overwhelming majority of those nights the people of that town got the number right, on purpose, at whatever cost, and only 11 times did they fail. I have seen the dates, and I went and found what happened in the town in the months after each one, and I need you to understand that I did not want to find a pattern, and I found a pattern anyway. The oldest short we can cross-check is the autumn of 1851, 4 years after the official founding. The county's own records, thin as they are, note that a fever came through Ashford Hollow that winter and took an unusual number of the town's people, concentrated, strangely, among a single, extended family. Not spread across the town the way a fever spreads, concentrated, as if a specific number was owed and a specific number was collected. The short in 1851 was a count that came up 11 souls under. That winter, the town buried 11. Then there is 1863 in the middle of the war, when a company of soldiers, nobody is even sure from which side, camped in the hollow on the wrong night and would not be moved, and the count could not be taken clean with all those strangers inside the line. The book says short, and it does not give a number, and there is a page after it that has been torn out, the only torn page in the entire book, and the clerk who kept it afterward left the town and the state and, as far as anyone can tell, the country. Whatever happened that winter, the people who lived through it decided it should not be written down, and these are people who wrote down everything. There is 1889, when the count came up short by 6 after a wagon of townspeople failed to make it back inside the line before moonrise, stranded by a washed-out ford, 6 short in the book, and by spring 6 graves, from what the record calls misadventure and grief, in a town of a few hundred in a single season. There is 1918, the year of the great influenza, when you might think a short would be easy to explain away, except that the town's own count that harvest moon was short by 3, and the 3 people the town lost to the flu that year were, according to the burial record, the 3 people who had been away visiting kin in Ohio and did not make it home in time. The flu was everywhere. But it took, from Ashford Hollow, exactly the 3 who were outside the line on the night the book came up 3 short, and it left the ones who stayed. There is 1934, the depth of the depression, the only short in the book that the town, if you press them, will half defend. That autumn a family in the hollow was starving, truly starving, and on the harvest moon the father took his wife and his 4 children and walked them out down the mountain in the dark, toward a relief station 2 counties over, choosing, he said, a real and present hunger, over a debt he had never once seen come due. The Count went short by 6. And not one of those 6 was ever heard from again, not on the relief rolls, not in the next census, not in the memory of a single soul in the county they were walking toward. As if the mountain had quietly subtracted a family of 6 from the world somewhere between the town limit and the bottom of the road, the people of Ashford Hollow do not call that man a fool. They call him the last one who really tested it, and they say his name softly, and they use his 6 as the number they teach the children with. 6, they say. That is what it costs to decide the Count does not apply to you. 6, and a road you walk down in the dark and never reach the bottom of. And there is 1937, 1 year after Harlan Price came through with his notebook and his questions, when the Count came up short by 1, and the one the town lost that winter was a man who had spent the autumn telling everyone who would listen that the whole thing was nonsense, that he had talked to a government writer who was going to put Ashford Hollow in a real book and show the world there was nothing up on that ridge but an old pile of dirt. He said he was going to prove it. He said he was going to walk out on the harvest moon and drive to Charleston and be back by morning, and nothing would happen because nothing was up there. He walked out, the book came up 1 short, and he did not come back by morning, or ever, and the town never found him, and the only thing anybody could say for certain was that he had been the one voice in the hollow arguing that the Count didn't matter, and the Count had answered him. You can call the first one a coincidence, you can call the second one a coincidence too, but you cannot call all 11 of them coincidence. Somewhere around the 3rd or 4th matching pair of numbers, the coincidence explanation costs more to believe than the thing it's trying to explain away. And that is the exact feeling the people of Ashford Hollow have been living with for 170 years. They are not superstitious. That is the thing I most badly want you to hear. They have simply been keeping the same set of books as the thing on the ridge, and they have noticed that when their number is right, nothing happens, and when their number is wrong, the ground takes the difference. So they make sure the number is right. That is the whole of the staying. That is why they stand across the road on the night of a harvest moon with lanterns in their hands, asking you, so politely, to please be gone before the moon clears the ridge. They are not keeping you out to hurt you. They are keeping you out because you are not in the book. You do not belong to the ground, and if you are inside the line when the Count is taken, you throw the tally off. You make an entry that shouldn't be there. And they have learned, the hard way, 11 times over, what the ridge does with a tally it doesn't recognize. I asked one of them about it. An old man named Presley Merrick, a direct descendant of the Josiah Merrick on the false historical marker, who, at 81, is one of the people who still stands on that road. I asked him if he was afraid, out there in the dark, waiting for the moon, and he thought about it for a long time, the way mountain people do when they have decided you deserve a real answer, and he said no. He said the ones who are afraid are the ones down in the towns below who think they got out. Because getting out, he told me, is not the same as being off the books. His own aunt left Ashford Hollow in 1952, moved to Cincinnati, married, had children, died an old woman in a hospital far from any ridge, and the family down there believes she escaped. But Presley said that when she was dying, at the very end, she asked them to open the window, and she looked up at the moon, which happened to be full that night, and she started to count, very softly. Numbers with no end to them. And the last thing his aunt ever said, in a hospital in Cincinnati, 400 miles from the reckoning ground, was, "I'm still on the page." That is why they let the young ones leave. Listen to this, because it is the coldest strategy I have ever heard a community adopt, and they adopted it on purpose. Ashford Hollow believes that a soul which leaves the ground young and lives its whole life outside the line and never comes back inside on the night the Count is taken is a soul the ground can never fully enter into the book. A payment declined. A name the arrangement reaches for and cannot quite close its hand around because the person was gone too far, too long, too early. So the town does not fight to keep its children. It does the opposite. It ushers them out. It empties itself, on purpose, a little more every year, not out of despair but as a strategy, the way you would pay down a loan by refusing to borrow another $1. Every child who leaves and stays gone is a soul the ridge will never count. And a soul the ridge will never count is a payment the town never has to make. They are starving it. They have been starving it deliberately, quietly, for 3 generations, and it is working, and that is the most hopeful and the most horrifying thing about the entire place at the same time. Which brings us back to Cyrus Bell, the insurance man in the two-tone Oldsmobile, who drove through the line in 1974 with a $1 tip cooling on Effie Trawler's counter and a route book on his seat that would end mid-word. Bell was inside the town when the moon rose. We know this because Effie knew it, and Effie spent the rest of her life telling anyone who would listen that the moment she realized he had not cleared the ridge in time, she went to the courthouse and she watched the clerk that year, a man named Dell Aldrich, open the tolling book, take the count, and stop with his pen in the air, because the count was 1 too many, not short, over. There was a body in the hollow that did not belong to the hollow, and the book had no column for that. Aldrich, she said, wrote the true number of the town, and then, in the margin, because he didn't know what else to do, he wrote 3 words that are still there, that you can still see, the only entry in 170 years that breaks the pattern. He wrote, 1 not ours. 4 days later, an Oldsmobile turned up on a shoulder 11 miles away, keys in it, coffee going cold, and no Cyrus Bell. The town's own count, the following month, was correct again. Whatever balancing happened outside the line, to the one who came from outside the line. The ground did not take one of theirs, it took the one that wasn't in the book. And the people of Ashford Hollow have never decided, in 50 years, whether that means the system is cruel, or whether it means the system was, in some horrible way, protecting them by spending the stranger instead of the child. That is the question that keeps them standing on that road. Not fear of the ridge, fear of you. Fear of what your name in their valley on the wrong night will cost, and fear, maybe, of how relieved they will be when the ground takes you instead of one of their own. Somebody smarter than me tried to take this apart, and I think you deserve to hear how that went, because it is the reason I stopped being able to laugh at it. In the late 1990s, a folklorist from a university downstate came up to Ashford Hollow to do exactly what I came up to do, which was to be reasonable about it. Her name was Dr. Marion Colfax, and she was not a believer in anything except her own methodology. She had a theory, and it was a good theory, and it was that the tolling book was a 19th century fabrication, a piece of community theatre that got handed down and taken too seriously, and that the 11 shorts were nothing but the ordinary arithmetic of grief in a hard place, matched to numbers after the fact by people who wanted them to match. And she set out to prove it the honest way. She got permission to test the book. She had a page sampled and dated in a lab. She had the handwriting analysed across the generations. She ran the death records against the short years with real statistics, the kind that are built to find false patterns and throw them out. The dating came back wrong. Not wrong in the direction she expected. The oldest pages of the tolling book tested older than the town, older than the settlement, older than the paper they were written on had any business being, and the lab assumed contamination and asked for a fresh sample, and the second sample came back the same, and the lab stopped returning her calls. The handwriting analysis found exactly what the town had always said, that the hand changed across generations, but the book was never once interrupted, never restarted, never missed a year, across a span longer than any other continuous record in the county, longer than the county itself. And the statistics, the cold numbers she had brought up the mountain to kill the whole thing with, told her that the odds of those 11 counts matching those 11 waves of death by chance were so small that her own report, which I have read, uses a word I never expected to find in an academic paper. It uses the word impossible. Dr. Colfax did not publish. She wrote in her private notes that she could not find the fraud, and that a responsible scholar does not print a mystery she cannot close, and she left the whole thing in a drawer and retired early. When a graduate student wrote to her years later asking about the Ashford material, she wrote back a single line. She wrote, "Some doors you close by never opening them again. Now I want to go back to the accounting, because I promised you this was not a ghost story, and the deepest, coldest part of Ashford Hollow is not the disappearances, it's the bookkeeping. Let me walk you through the one census that the federal government would very much like you to believe is a clerical error. In 1901, a special enumerator was sent up to Ashford Hollow to correct what Washington thought was a mistake in the 1900 count. The 1,000 900 census had recorded the town's population, and it had recorded something in the margin of the population sheet that no enumerator was ever supposed to write. Alongside the count of the living, someone had entered a second, larger number, under a heading that the printed form did not contain, a heading someone had drawn in by hand. The heading said, Ode. The living count was a few hundred. The ode count was in the thousands. And when the 1,901 enumerator went up the mountain to sort out this nonsense, he came back with his report, and his report is why we know the number wasn't nonsense at all. He wrote that the townspeople had explained it to him plainly and without drama, which unsettled him more than any amount of raving would have. The living count, they said, was who was here now. The ode count was the full number the ground had been promised across all the years the town had left to run. It was a total. It was the whole loan, principal and interest, every soul the arrangement would ever require, laid out as a single figure, the way a bank knows, on the day it writes your mortgage, the exact and enormous total you will pay before you are free. The town of Ashford Hollow, in 1901, handed a federal official a schedule of amortization for a debt paid in human presence, and the official filed it, and Washington stamped it a clerical error, and moved on, because there is no box on any form for what to do when a town hands you the paperwork on a mortgage it took out with the earth. And here is the part that I cannot get out of my head, the part I keep coming back to at 2 a.m. That owed number, the total, has been going down. The clerks track it. Of course they do. That is the entire purpose of the tolling book, to work the balance down, harvest moon by harvest moon, count by correct count, towards zero. When the enumerator recorded it in 1900, the owed figure was in the thousands. The clerk let me see the current page. I am not going to tell you the exact number, because it felt like a private thing, like reading the balance on a dying man's account. But I will tell you that it is no longer in the thousands. It is in the hundreds now, and the town that once had 800 souls now has fewer than 90, and every child that leaves brings the ceiling of what they can ever owe down with it. They are converging. The debt is shrinking, and the town is shrinking, and somewhere not very far ahead, on a harvest moon that a child alive today will live to see, the two numbers are going to meet. And nobody in Ashford Hollow will tell you what they think happens then. Whether the debt closes and the town is free, a lease fulfilled, a mortgage burned, everyone who is left finally able to stand on the county road on that night like anyone else, and watch the moon come up over the ridge without a single lantern lit. Or whether a debt that was paid in presence, once it is finally paid in full, is closed the way any account is closed. By collecting the last of what is owed, all at once, and then shutting the book on a valley with nobody left in it to keep the page. I stayed for a harvest moon. I should tell you that, because it is the only part of this I know first-hand instead of from books and interviews, and it is the part I would take back if I could. They let me stay because I asked to be counted, and Presley Merrick, after a long silence, said a man who wants to be on the page is at least an honest man, and they walked me inside the line before dark. I am not going to dress it up. For most of the night, nothing happened. People sat on their porches. The lanterns came out. The road filled with quiet figures who turned 3 cars around without raising their voices. It was almost peaceful, and I started to feel foolish, and I started to think about the affectionate little video I had come up the mountain to make. And then the moon cleared the ridge, and the whole town, all of it, every person on every porch, went silent at the same instant, not gradually, all at once, the way a room goes silent when someone important walks in. And I felt it. I am a skeptic, and I felt it, a pressure, a kind of attention, as if the ridge above us had turned some enormous slow face toward the valley and begun, without hurry, to count. I heard the clerk down in the square, through the open door of the courthouse, saying the numbers out loud in the dark, and I heard the town holding its breath while he did it, and I understood, for one bad minute, exactly why these people do this, why they would stand in a cold road their whole lives to make sure a number came out even. Because you do not argue with the thing that is counting. You just make very sure that when it reaches your name, you are there to answer to it. The count came out right that night. I know because the whole town exhaled at once when the clerk closed the book, a sound I have never heard a group of people make before or since, and Presley Merrick put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Well, you're on the page now," and he smiled when he said it. But it was not a comforting thing to be told, because being on the page is not the same as being safe. Being on the page means the ground knows your name and expects you to keep answering every harvest moon for as long as the book stays open. And the book is not closed yet. I drove out the next morning, down the mountain, in daylight, the way you are still allowed to. The road that had been a wall of lanterns the night before was just a county blacktop again, empty and ordinary, with a dead iron post rusting in the weeds where the town limit used to be marked. Presley Merrick walked me to my car. He did not ask me to keep any of it to myself, and that surprised me, and I said so, and he told me the town had stopped worrying a long time ago about who believed it, because believing it was never the point. The point was the number, and the number did not care what I believed. Then he said the thing I have not been able to put down since. He said, "You asked to be counted, so you are counted now, and the ground is patient, and the next harvest moon will find you wherever you happen to be standing." He was not threatening me. He said it gently, the way you would remind a friend about an appointment they had let slip their mind. And I will tell you what I have noticed in the months since I came back down that mountain, and then I will let you go. On a full moon, when the light comes in the window, I have started, without ever deciding to, very quietly, under my breath, to count. So let me leave you where I always end up, which is back on that ridge, at the reckoning ground, the perfect 8-pointed star that guards no road and overlooks no crossing, and was already old when the oldest thing in the valley was young. Because if the revisionists are right, if that star and that courthouse and that fine dead ironwork are the leftovers of a country whose name was taken away like a knife from a child, then Ashford Hollow is not a strange exception to American history. It is a single visible seam in something that runs under all of it, a place where the old arrangement never got properly closed out, where the tenants never stopped paying, where the books were never balanced and buried, and so the accounting just went on, quietly, in a wooden box in a courthouse nobody can explain, in a town that empties itself a little more every year, working down a total that only they can see, toward a zero that only they are afraid of. And if there is one town like that, sitting in plain sight with its impossible courthouse and its erased history and its ledger of the ode, then the only real question, the one that keeps me up more than any missing insurance man, is how many others there are, keeping their own quiet books in hollows we drive past without slowing down. You believe what you want about mud floods and lost empires and a currency paid in souls. I am not here to make you sign anything. But the next time you are driving through the mountains and the moon is coming up fat and orange over a ridge, and you round a bend and find the road ahead of you closed by a wall of quiet people with lanterns in their hands, do the one thing that everyone who ever walked back out of Ashford Hollow to tell the story did. Turn the car around, go back down the mountain, and let them keep their count. Because the only people who ever went missing on the night of a harvest moon were the ones who decided the count did not apply to them. And the ground, whatever it is, however old it is, and whatever it was owed by whoever built that star on the ridge, keeps very, very good books, and it does not forgive a debt. It only waits for the number to come out even, and somewhere ahead, on a harvest moon a child alive today will live to see, it is going to come out even one last time.